Just admitting everybody. We've got a good turnout tonight, so that's great to see. So welcome everybody to our eighth Open Clock Club, and particularly, as always, to new members. Tiny bit of housekeeping. As always, we've got loads to get through tonight, so we're going to press on from where we were last week. Remember, a bit of housekeeping is that these videos, these sessions have been filmed and they go on our Open Clock Club archive YouTube site. So if you want to remain anonymous, then please keep your video turned off. Otherwise, same format as always. We will do kind of 3 15-20 minute sessions. Evening, Mark, just joining us. And you may remember that last week we kind of got well into our depthing and bushing, which is kind of getting ahead where we were meant to be. We are primarily here for beginners. And to that end, our team here run the Facebook group, How to Repair Pendulum Clocks. So a big shout out to Jane and Mike for keeping that going during the week. We're doing what we can to answer questions. So if you're not already signed up to the Facebook group, then it's a useful kind of forum where you can exchange information. So the reason we're talking about bushing and depthing is because John and I have been slaving tirelessly to get an e-publication out on the subject, because there's a lot of talk about it on the NAWCC, that's the American forum. Let's just admit another couple of people. Evening, everybody. And so we thought that would make a really good standalone e-publication to support readers of our first book, How to Repair Pendulum Clocks, Volume 1. He said, getting the commercial break in there. Because it's going to be in book 2, but book 2 isn't going to be out until summer or even, you know, something like that. So anyway, we're pressing the gas pedal on that one. And last week we started talking about evening, Jane. We started talking about depthing, and there was a kind of lot of shout outs for, can you do a demonstration of hand bushing, which I will. Of course, it's all a bit on the fly, so it'll be in our e-publication in a couple of weeks' time. But nevertheless, we'll do a little recap. We started talking about depthing last week, and then this week we're going to do a bit on bushing. Now, the key and secret to these sessions working really well is not me banging on, but it is in fact the live chat. So is everybody there in the live chat, Rachel? Yeah, so it's becoming a tradition to say hi to Rachel. Rachel will say hi back and tell us where you're from, because after this session finishes, we print up the live chat and we look for questions and things in there, and it's really great to see where people are from. Just one bit of housekeeping before we go on. You may remember this plate, which we talked about last week. I've lost my pencil already. And somebody said, what were the dimensions? We put the scan of it on Facebook, and oh, there's my pencil. And so it's all in millimeters, 170 millimeters tall, 120 wide at the base, and about 83 wide at the top. Now, I asked 2 questions last week. We'll answer one of those questions. Wrong way around. Let's put it that way around. So we've got the striking train. We've got the striking train here on the left, and we've got the going train here on the right. And my question really to myself was, why does the striking train, the warning wheel and the fly, the gathering pallet, warning wheel and fly, go off to the side of the plate here? Why don't they go up here like normal? And I kind of had half an idea. So if anybody's got an idea about it, wants to have a guess or a punt, then please let us know in the live chat. And the other thing is, what are these holes here for? So this is the killer question for the beginners. Think about clockmaking. What's that little hole for, and that little hole? So we'll give you 10 seconds on the live chat for somebody to answer that. Anybody there with what are those little holes for? All right, okay. What those holes are for, yeah, is when the clock is made, you have two plates together. You rivet both plates together, and you rivet them together with tiny little taper pins. So the clocks, people love using those. And so you drill all the holes through so they're all in line. And this is where this clock was pinned together. And it's quite unusual actually, because normally, like this long case clock, those holes are here at the top. There's one here at the top, and there's one down here at the bottom. It's a little bit more unusual to see them on the sides of the plate like that. So that's what they're for. Yeah, and there's also marks. Oh, we've got another somebody to admit. Evening, everybody who's just joined us now. You'll normally find on the bottom of the plate, if you imagine, and I won't get too distracted, promise, imagine the plates pinned together like this. So you've got the two pieces of brass. That's fine when you've got them fixed together. And I think, I know one of my former students is with us, and John's here as well. So they both made clocks from scratch. That's great once you've got the plates drilled together. You drill all the holes in and you can open the holes up. But the problem is it's ever so easy to get the plates mixed up as you're making the clock, which takes ages. So what you do is you strike across with a file, a V like that. So when you get to look at historic clocks, handmade ones, then if you see those marks across the bottom of the plate, that's what it's for. Okay. So as normal, we're going to split this into 3 sessions. We'll have a couple of 2-minute or 3-minute comfort breaks. And the first session's on bushing. The second session, for those beginners, we're going to deal with this. Oh, yeah, we're going to deal with that from our book, which is how to remove this pinion here from the clock, from our Smiths Enfield single train clock. Okay, right. So depthing and bushing. So we might remember last week, we have our 2 wheels together. In this case, we've got them in the depthing tool, and we've worked with the depthing tool, and we've found the optimum mesh of those 2 wheels. We found the optimum mesh of those 2 wheels. Let's just have a look here. Okay. So what I've done, these 2 wheels are from our trusty Enfield plate here. Let's just put them together like that. Now the problem I had was this clock actually, wherever the back plate is here, isn't particularly worn. So I didn't want to, I didn't actually want to start working on this plate. In fact, I've got so many clocks in bits at the moment with these demonstrations. I didn't actually want to start working on this plate because this bearing here for this lower intermediate wheel actually isn't that worn. So what I've done, because this is a demonstration of hand bushing, is I've made up a little bit of metal here. So let's just go on to video like that. I'll sit down. Oops, wobbly. So what we've got here is a couple of holes. They're both the same diameter with an oil sink. So this is your clock plate. And when the clock is new, there is, and you'll hear about this a lot on the forums and something, there's about, rule of thumb, 5 degrees of what we clockmakers called side shake. Is what we call side shake. Now you need this as well as what we call end shake in order for the clock to run. But when the hole gets worn, one result of that is side shake increases massively. But if we look here, that you can actually see that the pivot is moving about in the hole. Now, the killer point here is that what I'm seeing on these forums is people looking at the pivot jumping about in the hole and saying that hole needs bushing. And I would say, no, that is not the case. What that is an indication that it might need bushing, but you've got to go to the depthing process that we showed last week with the wheels in the frame to actually check that it does. Anyway, if you look at last week's video, if you're new to us this week, it's on YouTube, you can find out about that depthing process. So we establish here that this hole, which started off, you can see the center line that I've marked on there, and it's moved across in this direction. Somebody said, is that train across to the side because it was some kind of repeating? I don't think that's the reason. It's got something to do with the escapement, I think. That isn't too much of a clue. Okay, so just to recap, we've got our original bearing hole there. I'll draw in the oil sink and I'll draw in the pivot there. So what happens, let's just do a bit of coloring. So this is the pivot, this is the brass plate round here, and we get a red pencil. What happens is, as the wheels run, they force one another apart. So let's say this wheel is being, do you lose power then if the pivot wobbles in the hole? Do you lose, question from the live chat, do you lose power if the pivot wobbles in the hole? Yes, you do. Again, without going back and going over what we did last week, look at that video from last week, because we had our depthing model, which we're getting time a bit later on, which is unlikely. We'll show you that. But yeah, that's the point, is that you lose the uniform angular rotation of the driving mobile. So the wheel goes faster and slow, but you also lose power to the degree that the clock stops. That's why people bush. My point is that bushing without depthing is you're shooting in the dark, because you might be doing a lot of work that's unnecessary, which is all changed to the clock, and it might be a cost to your client, and it's time that you haven't got. You can spend it doing something else. So check depthing first. We explain it, as I said last week. So our wheel, our pivot's rotating. Let's say it's going this direction, but actually it's been forced in this direction by the wheel that's driving it. There's an action and a reaction. There's two things forced one another apart. So what happens over time? Did it have a platform escapement? No, but keep going with your guessing. Is that, like our little model that we've made up here, I don't think it had a platform escapement anyway, is that the hole gets pushed aside. If you go on the NAWCC forum, there's a lot of talk about this. You see the pivot wobbling in the hole and you rebush it. Okay, so we've got to the point with this clock, this theoretical kind of case, where the intermediate wheel and the barrel have moved so far apart, the clock has stopped running because of friction, engaging friction, the thing that the clocks people call butting, engaging before the line of centers. Again, look at the thing last week. So we need to put this pivot back, not, he says, in its original position. We've got no idea what the original position was. We can have a guess, maybe, on a machine-made clock by the position of the oil sink, but do not take that as read that that's the right position. You've got to do the depthing to find the optimal position. If you've got a depthing tool, that's great, but you don't need that. Again, last week we showed you how to do that with the wheels in the frame. So we're going to return this pivot to this center position, and it's moved off to one side. So this sounds rather kind of basic. If you, oh, let's just admit somebody there, evening. If you just open up by reaming or broaching this hole, the new hole is going to be halfway between the old hole and the earlier, the new hole and the earlier hole. I won't call it original because we don't know about that. And so you might improve the depthing, but you won't kind of get it to its optimum position. So what we do is we have to remove material from this side of the hole. Once we've decided that this is the correct center distance, we want to move the pivot to that new place. So what we have to do is first remove some material from this side of the hole. Then when we open the hole by reaming or broaching, it goes back to what we believe is the center that we want. So how we do that is really simple. In this case, this pivot measures 2 millimeters in diameter. Now, I'm not going to draw on the plate. I would advise you never, I see a lot of people using a Sharpie pen on the plate of an historic clock. Remember, these are historic objects. That will leave a permanent mark that you can only get off by kind of scrubbing at it or chemically refinishing. So just make a note in a daybook, or put your clock plate on a flatbed scanner if you've got one, or a photocopier, and make notes there. Don't write with Sharpie pen. Sorry if I sound like a school teacher, whatever they are, because it marks the plate permanently and you've got to scrub away at it, I would say. So make a note in your book, and we can see that the pivot has worn in this direction, so we need to file in this direction. And that is exactly what I'm going to do. I'm just going to take a round file here and file. Normally I'd put this in the vise. In fact, I'm going to move across to the vise until I'm satisfied that our new center is, or we've removed enough material from this side of the hole to match what would worn away on that side of the hole. Now, this is fine for bigger holes. You can get the file in there. But if you go down on the end field here, for instance, when you get down to this end of the train, these holes are about 0.7 of a millimeter. You can't really get even an escapement file in there. So what I would do is I would get a jeweler's saw blade, if I can get hold of my jeweler's saw, in there like this, thread it through the hole with a fine blade in it, and make a couple of very small cuts. The problem with the jeweler's saw is that it cuts really quickly compared to a file, so it's easy to kind of overdo it. So let's just go back to our hole here. I'm going to move across to the vise and just quickly file some material away. Check that I get it right. So remember why we're doing this. It's easy to get kind of carried away and start filing and hammering and reaming and stuff, which is all great fun, of course, but we're doing this to optimize the depthing. This is all about depthing. Bushing isn't really a thing in its own right, unless you're building a new clock, of course. But let's just check how we're going there. Little bit more. When I was doing my artificial wearing, I actually went totally crazy and filed off too much, but anyway. Right, okay. So very quickly, what we've done now is we have filed away as much material on this side of the hole as is worn away on this side of the hole, pretty much. Maybe I need to do a little bit more. So now when we open the hole up to receive our bush, a bush for new beginners is a sleeve of material. I'll show you one after the break. We're going to take a break in a couple of seconds, and I'm going to get ready for the next stage of the process. So that's the first thing. Again, to reinforce, this is about depthing. Bushing is only a means to an end. What we're doing is we're returning those cogs, the gears, to their optimum center distance, as we talked about last week. So if you didn't see last week, go back to the archive on YouTube, and it's worth looking at that, the video. So we're going to take a 2-minute break now. We will see you back at 22 minutes past for the next bit. Thank you, and thanks for the live chat. Keep it coming. we're not quite finished with our break yet, but we've got a question coming in from one of our regulars, so thank you. Are there any other decent books on horology, apart from the excellent How to Repair Pendulum Clocks, Volume 1, of course, which is outstanding in every respect? Yes, is the answer, and John might want to chip in here. But the first thing I would say to get is Watchmaking by Daniels. Watchmaking by George Daniels, excellent, absolutely packed full of information. Yeah, it's about watchmaking, and if you get into watchmaking, it's really useful. But there's all sorts in here about setting up a workshop. The problem is that it's slightly incomplete information, which I suppose all books are to a degree. But get Daniels, read it cover to cover. There's so much in there about using a graver, about using a lathe, about jeweling, and who knows, you might get really carried away and actually make a watch, which would be brilliant. And it's got these fantastic illustrations by David Penny in there. Oh, look, I've got a signed copy showing off. What else? John?
What's that? I can always never. Is it Malcolm Wilde? I think the Malcolm Wilde book's really good.
Well, there's Malcolm Wilde. You're absolutely right, John. There's Malcolm Wilde on wheel and pinion cutting. Really brilliant. He's the guy that made the depthing tool. Fantastic. And there's John Wilding. And John, you might just tell them a bit about John Wilding.
Well, John Wilding is a chap that's over the years written loads of books about all sorts of aspects of clock repair and clock making. He's done quite a series of books on making specific clocks, like I'm just trying to think now, like a 30-hour long case clock movement and things like that. And he really does. Well, we were kind of influenced by him, really, because we thought that the way he kind of tries to break it down was the way to go, really. That'd be fair to say, Matthew?
Yeah, I mean, he was the first person that really got the photography right, and he thought it through. He was an engineer as opposed to a clocks person. So there's a lot of things like really useful tools to make and stuff. So yeah, Malcolm Wilde, Wheel and Pinion, John Wilding, great. George Daniels, watchmaking. Yeah, somebody said Donald DeCarl. I would, without being dismissive, not much use in it because it's inconsistent, incomplete information. It's great if you're experienced, and that's the problem with a lot of books. They're good if you can filter, but for the beginner, if you can't filter information, you don't know the terminology, you know, you don't know what to kind of believe or not. So I would personally, I mean, DeCarl's like £1 on Amazon, so get a copy. It won't do you any harm, maybe. But no, there's some crazy things in there that people just don't do anymore. So not DeCarl. And of course, if you've got the money, the BHI, you know, British Horological Institute's correspondence course is both clocks and watches, so go for that as well. And yeah, somebody just said Gaisley on Escapements, which is a brilliant book if you want to get more into the science and of then the math of clockmaking and so on. The other thing while we talk about books is join the Antiquarian Horological Society if you've got the money. They're really supportive. We were at one of the lectures last night on Zoom. They've got a good lecture series. And the good thing about the AH is that when you join, you'll get access to their digitized journal. It's all digitized, and they've got a fully digitized copy of the Horological Journal, the world's longest standing technical journal, and another magazine, which I forgot. So Antiquarian Horology, they're really supportive, great people. It's about £60 a year, I think, but well worth the membership. You can see this. I'll show you this. These are off prints from Antiquarian Horology about, you can see Harrison's repertoire there. This book got me my first job at the observatory, believe it or not, but that's a story for another day. So somebody asked, getting back to bushing, can you use wire, bushing wire, which is this stuff? If you haven't seen it before, beginners, this is hard drawn wire, can get it out there, with a hole through the middle. This is our preferred material for rebushing because it's consistent quality, hard drawn. It's good material, and of course it gives you a kind of infinite variation on. I mean, if you get the sets of bushes, which I'll talk about in a minute, they're perfectly fine. If it's a known quality of material, I wouldn't buy the ones that just come in those little random plastic boxes because you don't know what the brass is. And I've seen loads of bushes, particularly those things called top hat bushes or barrel arbor bushes, which is stepped, made out of red brass, that just kind of wear really quickly. So go for one of the known makes. This is Bergeon, or there's another make called KWM. I think they're absolutely fine. And the reality is you want a range of materials and techniques and tools at your disposal. So I actually use a kind of composite system. I never either do only hand bushing or only machine bushing. I mix and match as suits the clock and so on. We might have to do machine bushing next week. It's going to run out of time today. So yeah, this is our preferred material and what we're going to be using tonight for making our bush out of. Now, I would say don't buy a box. I've bought 3 or 4 boxes in my horological life. And the thing is, I don't repair watches hardly ever, if ever. So I never use this small stuff. I only ever use the stuff at the bigger end. So buy individual sticks. You can get them from your, cousins or HS Walsh or something like that. I've seen some really, really inexpensive versions of it on eBay. I bought some and they were really all over the place. So buy a branded, when you buy them, you think, gosh, it's £15 for one stick. But of course, it lasts ages and you pass that cost on to your customer anyway. So yeah, bushing wire is my preferred way to go, but it's absolutely it's not the only way. Here are pre-made bushes by Bergeon, and these come in a range of sizes. We can talk about those next week. And there's another brand called KWM, which I think are also of known quality, so hardened and drawn. Can we use, which question we're looking at? Can we use KWM Bergeon cut bushings instead of wire, as wire is right? Okay, if you can't find the wire, yeah, use the bushes. We're going to get onto key point number 2 here, is that once you've done the depthing process, the next point, from my perspective, I work in the heritage and conservation museums world, so I'm kind of lucky in that respect. So my kind of broad aim, is to remove as little existing material from the clock. So what I wouldn't do is to go along with the standard bush and open up the plate, because that's unnecessary material. In our new book, we've got a cross-reference table here, which is going to be published in color, of course. And we did some kind of slightly non-scientific experiments. And actually, the wall thickness of the bush that you need needs to be incredibly thin compared to the standard bushes. We'll talk about more. That's my kind of second critical point after you get your head around the fact that we're talking about depthing, not bushing. Keep the wall thickness to a minimum. And you can do that, but you have to drill out the bushes or broach them out by hand. Okay, so back to our hole that we moved across a little bit. We now have to make that hole round on the basis that we've found the optimal center distance for those 2 mobiles. And you can do that 2 ways. You can use this, which is a clockmaker's broach. It's a 5-sided hardened cutting device, which is really useful because, of course, you've got kind of an infinite number of sizes here. Or you can go down the machine bushing route, where you have these things, which are reamers. These are the Bergeon ones. Now, these are great because they're quick. You can whack them through quite quickly. The problem with these is you've got a relatively restricted number of outside diameters. So they're like 2.53, 3.54, something like that. I don't know what the KWM ones are, but actually you can, I would, if I were doing this commercially, use these to rapidly open up the hole and then go to broaching for the final fit. And in fact, if we go back to our bit of paper, the kind of only difference between hand bushing and machine bushing is the fact that when you bush by hand, you saw that that brooch, that is a form of reamer, but we won't call it a reamer because that's confusing. That brooch is tapered. It's got a very slack taper. So when you put a piece of material in the plate, the bit of material also has to be tapered to fit. It's not that difficult. It sounds kind of crazy, but I'll show you as long as we run out of time. So if we imagine our plate here, I'll draw this kind of exaggerated. We're going to put 2 bushes in this plate. So here's our plate like that. A hand bushing, oh my gosh, drawing's a bit crazy, I'm afraid, is a tapered thing like that. And a machine bush is a parallel sided thing like that. Sorry, that's probably difficult to see there, but that's fundamentally the only difference. You're still putting, well, why keep the wall of the bushing to a minimum? Why keep the wall of the bushing to a minimum? Because you want to minimize the amount of original or existing material that you remove from the clock. You know, I'm not personally in the mode of sort of improving things or whatever. So we know we want to return our center distance to an optimal distance for gearing and transmission of power. So, you know, once you've worked out, in this case, our pivot is 2 millimeters diameter, you know, you'll get away with a bush outside diameter of, say, 3 millimeters, or maybe even a little bit less, which is, of course, 0.5 millimeter wall thickness. Why remove more material? It's just unnecessary change to the object. But of course, this is all based on a kind of conservation principle that I have to adopt to get the kind of work I want. Where if I went in there and I just went in with the standard outside diameter of the bush, I wouldn't get any more work, and it would contravene my kind of, I won't use the word ethic, but I'll certainly say, you know, one of the fundamentals of conservative practice is what they call minimal intervention. So only doing what is necessary to get to an agreed state, and that agreed state is we want to move the center distance. So removing material is something I wouldn't do unless I kind of felt I had to do, you know, and I've got to stand up and justify that professionally. Same for cleaning. It's why I don't clean with ultrasonic or ammoniated solutions, because it brings about what I believe is unnecessary change. But anyway, let's not get onto that tonight. So this brooch, we're going to start and open up this hole. Now, you can see it's just done by rotating the brooch in the hole and until we get to outside diameter. Now, what's really important here, I'm doing this obviously very kind of quickly for the sake of the demonstration, but what's really important is that you do something called uprighting, which is, right, now I've got, oh, there it is. Uprighting, which is keeping the brooch perpendicular to the plate. That's really important, and particularly in the second phase of this process, because we look at this, if the brooch isn't perpendicular to the plate in that respect and in that respect, what will happen is your wheel will appear to be have plenty side shake, side kind of movement, that 5 degrees we talked about. But actually, when you put the plate together, it won't be uprighted, so it'll bind up, and we see that a lot. Now, there's a good case here, but that's based on the fact that the other hole that the other pivot's sitting in is directly opposite, which it might not be. So I continue to broach. So this way, if you're doing machine broaching, you would now be, and I can feel it getting smoother and smoother and smoother as we get back to and we get back to a kind of round hole. And I can still be a little bit of that wear. Well, let's call that a day for sake of argument. So in the last few strokes of the brooch, I'm going to check my uprighting. So I'm going to check that it's 90 degrees that way and it's 90 degrees that way. Joe, Matthew isn't into improving. Yeah, I'm not Vulimy or Vulliamy, as some people call him. Oh, that's another great question, isn't it? When he was Swiss Vulimy, I think. So when does he stop being Vulliamy and start being Vulimy? Anyway, Rachel's our specialist on that. So what we've done now, look, is no ultrasonic cleaning. No ultrasonic cleaning, I'm afraid. That's for another date. So we've made our hole broadly round. Now, thinking about George Daniels, what you'll see here, because I've done this really kind of quickly and kind of gone at it a bit like an animal, you'll notice that the hole actually isn't perfectly round. It's kind of gone hexagonal. If that happens when you're broaching, particularly on bigger holes, get a bit of pegwood and jam it in with the brooch, and that will make the hole round again as you brooch. I learned that from George Daniels. Okay, so let's just remember, yeah. So we've got a tapered hole from the inside. So we're now going to put in our bush. You can see there's a little burr there on the inside of the hole, which I'm going to remove if I can find it with. I'll actually just use a little chamfer from my bushing tool, but I'm actually looking for an oil sink cutter. This is all a bit rough and ready, but anyway, there you go. So I've just removed that burr, which has actually left a little chamfer. So not ideal. Okay, so now we want to insert our bush, our sleeve of brass. And I'm going to do this first with the hand bushing method. How we're doing for time? Yeah, we're okay. With the hand bushing method. So I'm going to use a bit of bushing wire. And what I've done is prepared one, surprisingly kind of organized here, and I've got it in the lathe. So I suppose the next question is, can you do this without a lathe? Well, the answer is you can. Life is a lot easier if you've got a lathe or a watchmaker's lathe or something like this. But it's not absolutely essential. You could file it and so on, but it would be slightly more difficult. Now, I put a bit of wire in the core of the bush there. So in the live chat, what's that bit of wire for? Can the brooch be rotated in any way? In I don't know what you mean. Can you expand the question a little bit, please?
Does it cut in both directions, clockwise and anti-clockwise?
Yes. Yeah, it does. Yeah, it's cuts with a very negative, if you did it a lathe tool, very negative top rake, which is really useful when you're finishing the hole because it work hardens the hole as well. Lots of people that talk about smoothing brooches. Personally, I would keep your money.
Matthew, someone's also mentioned why not broach from the other side, and you probably need to say something about keeping the hole tapered in one direction.
Yeah, just for this, keep the hole tapered from the inside out. And that's only on the basis, I don't think it actually matters. But let's say you've got a barrel arbor, the back bearing of a barrel arbor, and you're winding it and giving with a cranked key on a long case clock. I suppose there's a tiny weeny chance that the bush is going to get forced out by the action, particularly if you use a very thin wall bush. Whereas if it's tapered, it's always going to get pushed into the hole. So the bushes can never fall out. So that's why I do them from the inside out. So here, look, we've got our bit of wire, and what I've done is I have just put a roughly what I call brooch taper on there with my graver. Can't really see what I'm doing here because I can't get my head in the way of the phone, but I've put taper on there. I'm just going to put a weeny little bevel on the front, and then I'm going to try it in the hole to see how it goes. And we can see already by some amazing good luck, it's already going in the hole. We actually want it to go in about 2/3 of the depth of the hole before we decide to cut it off. So I'm just going to have a little look through an eyeglass because I can't see. It's actually nearly there. I'm probably just going to risk it because I can always broach the hole out a little bit. I'm actually going to just try and round that hole up. Thank you. Pass us a tiny bit of thin pegwood, please. So yeah, somebody might ask, do I need a lathe? And the answer is pegwood, the long thin stuff. The answer is, yeah, you do. Ideally, you can get going without one. But the beauty of buying a watchmaker's lathe like this is 8mm. You can buy 6mm, perfectly fine for bushing. Is that if you buy one on an internet auction site and you look after it, you probably get your money back. They've gone up a lot in recent years. And a lot of them, this is a 20mm D bed. They're interchangeable parts, so you can get different parts from different makers and they kind of all fit together. So it's just the really thinest stuff, please. Just the thin stuff. So yes, you probably do need a lathe, is the answer, and you need a drilling machine. Just waiting for thank you. So if you want the hole to be round, get a bit of pegwood like this. This is quite big stuff, and basically squidge it flat and put it in the hole with the broach. I'm not sure this is going to work now. It's too big. Anyway, put a bit of thin pegwood in the hole with a broach and it'll make it round. We'll have to kind of gloss over that. How much does your lathe cost? My lathe was, I've sold a lot of the parts from this lathe over various stages of my life, like things like 3-jaw chucks and stuff, which don't really work in a 8mm lathe. But when I got it, I paid 500 for it. So that was with a drilling tailstock. The hand wheel is totally the way to go. Not one, I personally, sorry, don't want to offend people out there, but I wouldn't go with a little electric sewing machine motor because they kind of go, and the hand wheel gives you this really great control. For me, this kind of slow speed stuff, you can stop, you can start. And I'm from Yorkshire, so I don't want to buy the electricity either. So I actually didn't have, from the Yorkshire perspective, paid nothing for this lathe. I'm from a retail jeweler background, and back in when I first started in the, gosh knows when that was, the 90s, say, I actually had lots of uncollected repairs. When quartz watches were starting, we had uncollected repairs that went back 20, 30 years, and I swapped it for a load of uncollected repairs. Now, of course, those watches that I swapped for, the Seiko chronographs and things, are all worth a lot of money now. Now they're fashionable, but there you go. So we've got our bit of wire going about 2/3 of the way in the hole. This bit of wire, by the way, you'll see what that's for in a minute. So we want to cut it off. We know that our plate is 2mm. Let's just get a Sharpie pen, put it on there. Really see. So we just want to make a little mark with our plate edge in this case, just so I can see roughly where it wants to be chopped off. And I'm going to just cut it off at about 2mm. Now, doing this on the fly, live demonstration, is probably a totally crazy idea. But there you go. Now, what I don't want to do is to saw through the wire and clash down onto the bed of the lathe. Questions are coming through. Can we see an overall picture of your lathe? Yeah, you can see an overall picture of my lathe, definitely. Right, there we are. Now you see what the little bit of wire's for. There you go. It was worth turning up tonight, wasn't it? You don't have to go on the hands and knees under the floorboards looking for the bit of wire. So another thing there is that now we've got our, lost my taper tin. Oh no, it's there. Now we've got our bush cut off. What we can do to hold it is stick it on a taper pin that's draw filed, because you're going to say, how on earth I'm going to hold that bush, Matthew, and not let it go on the floor? Well, there it is. Okay, so if we take that out, we'll just get a smaller collet. Something like that. So yeah, the lathe is a mix. It's a bit of a mongrel. It's partly, I think, wolf yarn and partly. So using that taper pin, there we are, which I've draw filed, I'm able to get the thing back in the collet. Let's just have a show you any more incriminating evidence that's around my lathe, because it's a bit of a mess. But there we are. It's just a bog standard 8mm lathe. Got a drilling tailstock. I've got about 50 collets, and I use the Lorch, you can see it, hand wheel there, which you can get on internet auction sites for about £50. The hand wheel is the best £50 or £80 you'll ever spend. And as I said before, you never have to pay for any electricity either. It's really great. If you ever get into watches and you're turning balance staff, something like that, it's really cool. Now, again, I can't really see, just applying my glasses. I'm just turning the back of the bush flat. So when we tap it in, it'll be flat. It's not bad from the saw. And again, I'll just deburr like that. Flip over tool rest is absolutely, again, worth its weight in gold. So there you can see we've got our little bush, hopefully ready to go in there. I haven't put an oil sink on. If I will actually do that. It's a lot easier sometimes just to turn the, get it so it's concentric, turn the oil sink now. And in fact, if I can just excuse me for a minute, I'm going to look for my oil sink cutters. We want a break. We're just going to have a break. I promised a second break. And it'll enable me to, I found my oil sink cutter. We'll explain what this is. So just literally, if anybody needs a very quick comfort break, we'll come back at 50. So 1 minute, so be quick. Back to it, another 10 minutes. So for beginners, and sorry, we're not getting onto the pinion removal thing like I promised, so we'll have to do that next week. These, you buy them in sets, they're called oil sink cutters or roller cutters, and they make a little divot for the oil sink. Some people use a carbon burr, some people use a drill, but I'm going to use this. You can see it actually cuts quite nicely, even though these are pretty old. And what it's done is just flip that round. Hopefully I put it on the right side. It's made a little depression in there for our oil sink. Now, one point about oil sinks, which I will note for the live chat, and we can come back to it next week, is that a lot of old clocks don't have oil sinks. So don't put them there if they don't have them. Now, yeah, this is going to be, he said, make an excuse a little bit on the ropey side. But for next week, I'll do a neater one. How have you dealt with musical? Have you dealt with musical automaton clocks? Yeah, thank you for that loaded question. Have I dealt with musical automaton clocks? I'll send you a fiver in the post. Yeah, I deal with the clock at York Art Gallery.
It says picture as well, Matthew.
Picture of what?
No, it says musical automaton picture clock.
Oh, that's you. John's speciality is musical automaton picture clocks. Yes is the answer. Yeah, I have musical boxes. I don't really deal with musical boxes. Personally, I think they're a speciality in the same way that I don't touch barometers and so on. But yeah, automaton clocks, the Bose Swan automaton. We've just finished writing a paper, which is going to be published by the Chinese Academy of Sciences on conservation and the Bose Swan automaton. And we've got, me and my partner have got a paper in the pipeline for the Icon Journal. So yeah, if anybody wants to look at pictures of automatons one week, we'll do that. Right, okay, let's get rid of the lathe. And let's get that down there. So we've got our, get it off the thing. We've got our bush here. Okay, now I've forgotten a critical part of this process. Normally, to save time, I'd drill out the bush to just under pivot diameter. So this is 2 millimeters. I'd drill it out to like 1.9 millimeters and just do the final bit of broaching. I've got some sectioned pieces of brass somewhere that show how untidy right, just get out of control with the tools, how untidy a drilled hole is. So a broached hole is really brilliant. You'll hear people saying you don't want a broached final pivot hole because it's tapered from both directions. Well, we'll deal with that maybe, it might not be next week, but I forget about it. Broaching is absolutely fine. People have been doing it for hundreds of years. So I'm just going to tap this bush into the plate with my brass hammer. Like that. Brilliant hammers, these. You can buy a kind of copy. This is a version when you buy a copy, really kind of perfect for clockmaking. And there we have our, not very neat, I'm afraid, but bush pressed into our hole. So I'll do a tidier one for next week. Is there another question? Can you describe your indexing wheel on lathe? Okay, I can. That might have to be a question that carries over to next week with the whole indexing thing. In fact, John, are you willing to talk about the division master? You've got a division master, haven't you? And what, well, I've got not that now, obviously.
I've got that homemade thing. Yeah. Is that what you mean?
Yeah, because John's got a digital dividing thing for wheel cutting. I don't mean to show the lathe, John, but just talk about it maybe for 5 minutes next week.
Yeah.
About what that means. Okay, so we've got our bushing. Apologies for it being a little bit untidy. So if we can just find our wheel again, which is evaporated, I'll use a different one. Hopefully the pivot doesn't fit in the hole now. So we need to open the hole up to fit the pivot. Okay, so we're going to go back to broaching. I can find a broach that's right diameter. I obviously hadn't thought that I was going to get this far with a demonstration because I haven't got organized with this stuff. One thing about these broaches is don't do what I do. Do as I say, don't do what I do. And don't have your broaches so you've got to constantly change your pin vise or something. Fit them to little wooden handles, little bits of dowel, because every time you change it, you're wasting time and they're never really a particularly good fit. Right, okay, so we've got a smaller broach in, sit down, our hole. So this is where the uprighting is really critical. We're going to start broaching from the inside, and whoever said they can go in both directions, there we are, cut in both directions. So I hope I don't make this too big because we've got 4 minutes to finish the demo. So keep trying our pivot in there. You see, this is where it would have been a lot easier if I'd have remembered to drill it, because we'd be nearly up to size. The bush goes in from the inside of the plate. So it's a tapered hole from the inside. The outside of the bush is tapered, and it goes in from the inside of the plate. Right, and get in there. No pressure or anything. Again, checking uprighting, so I'm looking at it from sort of both X and Y axis. I need a different brush, I think. Yeah. So we continue to make the brush. You can see you could do this by hand entirely, but if you, oh no, I'll pull the brush out of the hole, damn. But if you, am I whacking? If you drill it, pre-drill it, it's going to make your life a lot easier, as you can see. Right. I think we may have to, there we are, beauty of a live demonstration. We might have to kind of leave it at that point and, come on, read. That's exactly what you don't want to be doing, of course. You don't want to be kind of whacking it. Normally you wouldn't have to rivet and certainly not have to solder, because that's just unnecessary work. If the bush is a good fit, you can normally tap it in and it stays there. Right, okay, we've got to the perfect position now. So what you can see, the pivot just goes into the hole and it's tight. Obviously the clock's not going to run like that. So what we're going to do now is we're going to, so that the bush won't fall out, is we're going to start broaching it from both sides. Which it might not have it. No, I have now made it too slack. So let's just, now we're going to, the first week, we're going to actually run over today by the look of it. So there you go. Tap it in again. Okay. So in our chapter on bushing, what we do is we suggest that you actually do this exercise first, and you can see exactly why, if you're new to it, why it's a nice idea to do it first. Okay, so I've now opened up the hole so the wheel just goes in, but there's not really enough side shake. In all the kind of rule of thumb books, you can see there that even with me pushing the wheel across, it's only just past upright. So what I'm going to do is to broach from both sides. I'm also going to broach from the outside, like that. So we've got a kind of double taper. Let's have a look. Once we're happy that we've got side shake and that the wheel passes the 90-degree position, that's the absolutely critical thing. What we need to do now is, we're happy with that, albeit a little bit untidy in the process. We're just going to get our smaller oil sink cutter, deburr a tiny bit, and then really critically, we're going to take a little bit of we're going to take a tiny bit of 4/0 steel wool, and without affecting the plate around the bush, we're just going to take a tiny bit of that in the hole with some pegwood, and we're going to deburr. Now this if you do this with new bushes without affecting the plate around the bush, it will save you endless headaches. Again, that's a really totally top tip. Obviously, you have to wash the plate and the pivot after this. You don't just put the clock together. But if you deburr on both sides with steel wool, it will save you endless problems. Because what happens with tight bushes is that the clock will tend to run at the beginning, but then there's micro cold welding at the too tight interface. 3 months later, the customer rings up, that clock you repaired, it stopped. So if you do that, it tends to stop it. So there you go, best laid plans and all that. We've got our bushing, we've got our side shake, we've returned it to what we feel is the optimal center distance, and it looks untidy, so I will do another one for next week that looks much tidier, because you kind of shouldn't be able to see where you've been. So we'll continue a bit next week with looking at those machine bushes, and what we'll do is, apologies to the beginners, we didn't get around to the pinion removing tool, but honest, we'll do it next week. Thanks for joining us. Sorry we overran, and we will see you next week. And thanks again for keeping up the live chat. Okay, bye for now.
Bye.
Well, there we are. That didn't quite go to plan. That's obviously one of the risks with a live demonstration. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to keep the camera rolling. I'm going to turn off my microphone and just redo that process. I'm going to make a new bush that's a little bit larger diameter and a little bit longer. I cut the first one a bit short and see how it goes. And then we'll continue next week as promised. So thanks again for watching for this far. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you for next week's free to attend, open to all open clock club. Thank you.